A bit of an overview. We're going to talk today about the human health impacts. We are going to talk about environment. We're going to talk about where we are now, the future. We'll talk a little bit about costs and the future opportunities. So really why we're here. Throughout this presentation, I should mention not all of the information is mine or on behalf of government. We did have the Solid Waste Association North America put on some sessions in November, and we're fortunate enough to have some speakers from across Western Canada and into Montana come and speak. So I have included in some of their information, and we're fortunate enough to have someone from Drumheller came in and talked about the regional landfill in Drumheller. And if you ever get a chance to hear her speak, we're looking at her doing some webinars for us. She gives a very, very dynamic and inspirational talk on their regional landfill setup in Drumheller and what it was like. So the previous slide was from hers, really talking about what difference do we want to make as we move forward. So most municipalities and rural municipalities know about the gas station scenario. Everybody wants that abandoned gas station cleaned up. Why? They want to make sure there's no contamination into the environment. The thing about that gas station is it only has one contaminant of concern, and we know what that contaminant of concern is. So let's take that gas station example and take it to your landfill. So you have the gas station, one contaminant of concern. You now have your landfill. Do you know what's been disposed of at that landfill over the decades and decades and decades that it's been there? Did burning occur at that landfill? Because if burning occurred, you're going to have even more impact potential. So the point of the landfill scenario is we don't know how many contaminants of concern we have at that landfill. It depends what's been disposed of there. It depends how it's been operated over the decades that it's been in existence. So your landfill scenario is no different than the gas station scenario. So the impacts to the environment from your landfill are impacts to groundwater, impacts to surface water, impacts to air, impacts to the wildlife and the soil on the site, and most importantly, the impacts are to human health, and so that's what we'll touch on. In Saskatchewan, part of the issue is that historically, our landfills have not been sited in proper locations. They've typically been in less desired locations, coulees, sloughs, somewhere where the farmland wasn't good. So they're not in proper locations to begin with. Then we haven't operated them properly. So we're increasing our chances of impacts to the environment. Historically, a lot of burning occurred on the sites. Regulations were passed in 1972 and 1984 that prohibited burning, but even since then, a lot of burning has occurred. Once you change the state of that material from a solid state to a burnt state, your potential for impacts and leaching does increase. Since the 70s, our waste has also continued to change with increase in plastics into our landfills, which does cause concern. Here's an example of a typical landfill site we still see in the province. All of that standing water within the cell is leachate. That leachate can potentially impact the groundwater or the surface water. In this scenario, lots of people think that they have a great landfill site. We'll go out and, we've got a really good site. It's really good clay. It's not going to impact the groundwater because we know that. The water's sitting there. It's not going anywhere. Well, you have no leachate collection, so what are you doing with that water? More than once, we'll come up. There'll be a pump going with a hose going off into a neighboring slough or water body or off into a field, and that water's never been tested. If that water's tested, when we do get the testing back, it's usually impacted. So operationally, this appears to be a good site. That being said, it was built and placed on pure sand. So this is a site where we do know that there's been impacts to the groundwater below. The EPOs, when they come out, most of them are trained with UAVs now, so they will use UAVs for their inspections. So from the ground, we thought we might have had a good site, and they might have been fairly compliant with regards to wind-blown litter. However, once you get up in the air, you can see how far back into the tree line the litter actually goes, which is an impact to our wildlife in the area. Most people think this is cute. We get a lot of stories about the landfill actually being the Friday night entertainment spot to go and watch the wildlife or go and watch the bears. But this isn't an ideal environment for the bears to be in, or any wildlife for that matter. And a major concern with this is the human-wildlife interaction of bear attacks, wolf attacks, that kind of thing at landfills. Unfortunately, this picture is still far too common in the province. It has been reduced over the last number of years, or 10 years, but we do come across a number of fires. The thing about fires is they are going to occur, and large landfills do have a couple of fire starts a year, but they are put out right away. However, lots of landfills, the fires are continuing to burn. What happens is it changes, like I said, changes that solid waste to a burnt ash material, which then increases your leaching potential into the groundwater and into the surface water. That's one impact. The big impact to human health, of course, is the impact from that smoke from the fire. So who has impacts? A lot of people think that, the city of Saskatoon, has impact potential because they're big and they take a lot of waste. We don't take a lot of waste, so we don't have an impact. Well, it's not a subject of your population or how much waste is received at your landfill that actually creates the potential for concern. It's your site conditions and any engineering or design that has occurred at that site. So if you have a site that's just been put on those historically less desired pieces of land next to the slough, no engineering in place to mitigate those impacts, you likely have more potential for concern than a city of Saskatoon or a city of Regina that has a designed and operated landfill. So looking in this, once you get the precipitation onto your waste, you're generating leachate. If you don't have proper containment under that waste, between your waste and your aquifers, you have potential to impact the groundwater. So once it's into the groundwater or the surface water, there's impacts to aquatic habitat. There's potential impact to your drinking water sources. So we talk a lot about, the importance of drinking water and wastewater. Well, your landfill and the impacts from your landfill do have potential to impact your drinking water sources. Again, we talk about landfills. We have a lot of increased concern about unauthorized dumping across the province in order to avoid those tipping fees. Again, if it's not a permitted site, it has a potential to create that impact. So this is one of our larger sites that we have followed up on, and it is close to being removed. But it's estimated that this individual saved $250,000 in tipping fees by taking the waste to his own land rather than to the landfill. A bit about burning of waste. I've touched on, the changing of the state from solid to ash. The regulations do spell out what waste can't be burnt. And when you go through that very long list, I could have put everything up. If you find anything in there that you can still burn, I'll be surprised, other than your clean wood. Right down to your plastics, rubber, no individual can burn that material. So again, this is a site we followed up on where a farmer had been collecting and burning their own waste for the last 30 years and then decided he wanted to get rid of it, so he decided he would burn it. And so again, that is not compliant. They're not allowed to do that. So we did follow up. And again, it's not just the environmental concern, but it is the human health impact from the burning of that waste. So really the why. Why don't we want to do this? And it's really interesting that we're still kind of connecting those dots for a lot as we're out doing education, but it does come back to that human health aspect and the impacts to those that are outside in the smoke and the air quality. So, I had one day where I actually ran home for lunch, which doesn't happen very often. I think it was right after New Year's, and we'd had new neighbors move in. I live on an acreage, and when they moved in, all the cardboard ended up outside. It exploded. And then Christmas exploded outside into their fire pit. And I said to my husband, they're going to light that up one day. I just know it. Came home at lunch one day, and I could smell it before I even got there. And they have this fire going, and they're burning all of their waste. And, of course, it's blowing directly at my house and my kids. So it's not really a great way to meet your neighbors. So when you're buying a house, find out what your neighbors do first for a living. But the other one is vegetable gardens. And when all that education came out about BPA and plastic water bottles, and and had people, everybody was running out to buy new glass water bottles and glass baby bottles, and nobody was going to drink from plastic. And then had some friends that they were getting rid of all those plastic water bottles that they'd replaced with glass, and they all went out into the burning barrel. Kids were outside playing, strawberry patches right next to the burning barrel, and they lit up all that plastic. So all that education into the fact that we shouldn't be drinking out of those plastic water bottles, but no education to the fact of what happens when you burn that plastic and your kids are outside running around, or the ashes falling onto your strawberry patch or your vegetable garden. So again, just on the burning side, it's really those air pollutants. A lot of issues right now with burning grain bags, and we're really trying to connect it back to the food chain. So again, you're burning that waste, that ash is on our land. You know, we're using it for crops, for grazing, backyard vegetable gardens, strawberry patches, and it's back into our food chain. So really trying to get everybody to think about what the impact is from your landfill. And when we start to talk about the impact from each landfill specifically, the only answer we have right now is we simply don't know. And that's why it is such a big issue in Saskatchewan, is we don't know what the potential impacts are out there, because we just don't have the information on every site right now. So we don't know what we don't know. Most sites in the province have not been conducting the groundwater monitoring that their permits require, or groundwater monitoring was removed from the permits because the groundwater monitoring and piezometer system wasn't in place. So you will see groundwater monitoring being replaced in all of the permits, and we need to get an understanding on the potential impacts that are out there. So a lot of sites are starting to do their monitoring now. So when we talked about, you know, the small site and the size of waste versus the city of Saskatoon and the city of Regina, those large sites have been monitoring for decades, and they know what their impacts are or what their potential impacts are very well. Most of our other sites don't, but site monitoring is starting to occur at sites, and it is starting to come in, and this is an example, not for the details, but the monitoring wells are in place and what's coming in from the consultants. And we are starting to see a lot of reports that there are elevated concentrations of contaminants of concern, that they're not able to delineate where they do end or the potential impacts that they occur, and most are recommending more testing. So this isn't all, but it is common results that we're starting to see. So again, the groundwater monitoring is going to start telling us that story of what is occurring out there on our landscape. When we say we don't know what we don't know, some sites might not have an impact, but some might. And, you know, there really hasn't been a lot of attention to landfills right now. It's been put behind drinking water and wastewater. Walkerton occurred, North Battleford occurred. That similar situation hasn't happened in the landfill world yet. You know, we do have a concern that we simply don't have a situation like that or a scenario like that right now, because we just don't know. Not because it's not occurring, but because we haven't found it yet. This graph goes to show the number of waste disposal facilities across different jurisdictions. Saskatchewan is sitting significantly higher than most jurisdictions. Alberta has 126, that's 126 waste facilities. They only have 50 municipal landfills in the province. I'll talk a bit more about Montana, as they did come up and give us a presentation, and they're at 32. The entire of the United States only has 1,800 landfills. So we're sitting at 1 million people, and we have 500 waste sites in the province right now. I would argue by this, yes, our province wants to be leaders. We want to be the first in things. I would argue we might not be the right ones in this scenario. Still in the province, most of our sites are not even landfills. They are still dump sites. And this is a picture of the province with the dumps spread out like a pincushion across our province. So just remember this graph of or picture of the province when we get to the Montana example. So right now, most of the sites are dumps. Here's Montana's picture. Going back to that graph, most other jurisdictions have had solid waste management strategies in place for 20, 30, 40 years. In the 90s, the US EPA came in and required the states to enforce their regulations. This keeps skipping ahead on me. One of which was groundwater monitoring. Montana came in and gave, we hear a lot about stop comparing us to Alberta, stop comparing us to Ontario. So we sat back and thought, who are we more similar than Montana? So when SWANA brought up the education sessions in November, they actually were able to get an individual from Montana State Environment to come up and give a presentation. And they're the same population as Saskatchewan. They're the same geographical spread, La Ronge and South. Communities of 15 people to 15,000 people, so very similar to Saskatchewan. They had 514 communities and 514 dumps. The morning after groundwater monitoring came into place, they had 32 landfills in the state. Their fines are $30,000 a day for non-compliance. So groundwater monitoring was required, they shut down, they were left with 32, and this goes to show the spread of the landfills across the state of Montana. A bit about costs. Again, this isn't my information. Some consultants did provide this information for the SWANA session. So what they were trying to show is that the capital costs of constructing a landfill are fairly similar regardless of what you're constructing. So you'll have a low range of $13 a ton to construct a landfill to a high range of 21, just depending on costs in your area. But construction, of landfills is a pretty consistent cost. So that's the capital cost to build the landfill. Now you have your operational costs. And what they're trying to show is that as you go to the larger regional model of a landfill, your operational costs come down, regardless of your size, regardless of if you're the small village or the city of Saskatoon, you're still required to have the operator, you're still required to have the compactor, you're still required to have the litter collection, you're still required to have the monitoring and testing. So regardless of how much waste you're accepting, you're still required to have those same operational inputs. So the larger or the more tons you're accepting, the lower your operational costs become. So they're showing that, if you're a 5,000 ton a year landfill, you're at the $130 to $225 a ton. Once you get up to the 20,000 tons a year, you're dropping to $54 to $88 a ton. We still have a lot of communities in Saskatchewan submitting proposals that they want to construct a landfill to accept 200 tons a year. So if you do the math from 5,000 down to 200 tons a year, what it would cost to operate that landfill in compliance. Just a little bit about incineration. We talked about the burning. Incineration, it's not prohibited, but it does have to be permitted and approved. And it's not as simple as a glorified burning barrel. These are incinerators, and there really aren't any in Western Canada or Canada areas close to us. And there's been a lot of research to show that the cost of proper incineration is even more than the cost of proper landfilling. So does that make sense in a place where we actually have the land to construct proper landfills versus Europe where they don't have the land? So they may have to pay more for incineration, but it's not just on the cost. To operate these facilities, it's even you need enough waste to fuel those facilities. And all of Saskatchewan likely does not have enough waste to operate an incinerator. So they're struggling to find enough waste in places like Taiwan to keep them going. So if you go back to the cost on the construction and operation of a landfill, we then go to show what you should be charging to construct and operate that landfill. Again, economies of scale. When you do go regional, you're putting lower costs onto your ratepayer when you're accepting more waste to that landfill. So if you're at that 5,000 tons a year to construct and operate, you'd have to charge between $143 and $245 a ton to cover those costs. If you're up to the $20,000 or 20,000 tons a year, you're down to charging 67 to 109 tons a year to properly dispose of that waste. Here's some examples of tipping fees across some jurisdictions. So the City of Calgary is at 111 to 275, depending on what the waste is. City of Lethbridge, 60 to 73. The presentation from Drumheller, 10 to 111 dollars a ton, depending on what the waste is. Saskatoon's at 105. Prince Albert, I live in Prince Albert. I've never even been to the landfill, so I'd argue it's probably low at 25 to 54. North Battleford is the province's highest, I believe, at 114. Again, that's because Mike's mean. And most Saskatchewan landfills are free, $0. In the case of Kindersley, also gives a great presentation on pre-fire state, and theirs was a wink and a gun and a catch you later next time. Lots of times we just get the response, it's on the taxes, so we don't need to charge anymore, or sometimes we might get the odd place charging $5. A little bit about closure costs, because people do cite that the closure costs are high, and there's been some numbers thrown out there that it's close to $1 million to close and decommission your landfill. Every landfill is going to be different. It's going to depend on what information you had pre-closure. It's going to depend what impacts are found. It's going to depend on how big your site is. This $413,000 example you'll see on the SUMA website would be high for Saskatchewan. There's not many that require stormwater ponds or leachate collection going forward. The major cost of your landfill closure is on the capping and covering, so it's going to depend on the area of waste that you have, where you have to get your clay in from, the cost of that earthwork. That is the majority of your cost. The groundwater monitoring is not actually the majority of your costs in the closure and decommissioning scenario. We've been getting a lot of calls because you are now required to put this on your financial statement as a liability. So we've been getting a lot of calls wondering how much it is to put on those statements. We can't answer that. Each site's going to be different. So that site assessment work that you have to have done to determine that cost is the same work that the ministry would require for the closure of your landfill. So once you get down to the Saskatchewan specific examples of the smaller, hectare landfills, you need to determine what your actual footprint is. We're looking, the average is about $200,000 for closure and decommissioning of your landfill. That being said, there are going to be some smaller sites that are going to be significantly less than that, but that could be about an average cost. Like I said, the engineering and groundwater monitoring isn't actually the high portion of that cost. It is in that cover material. We are working with communities to spread that over a number of years. So, the closure and physical closure to the public is that main number one. And we do work with the communities as long as there is a plan to set those funds aside over the next few years to do that decommissioning work. And again, this goes back to that long-term liability. If you maintain a site that hasn't had that groundwater monitoring, that doesn't know what those impacts are or aren't that haven't occurred, that doesn't know if there's an aquifer under that landfill, and we go forward and all of a sudden something shows up in a drinking water source and we chase it back to the landfill, then there's all that historical liability there. So moving into the innovation piece, how do we work together? Che-Wei is going to talk more about our province's roadmap going forward as a solid waste management strategy and jurisdictional scans that have been done. But really it's working together. When you're thinking about regionalization or decommissioning work, can you reduce the mobilization costs of the consultants coming out by getting a number of communities doing that work at the same time? Grant opportunities are usually looked at in a regional basis. So when you're thinking about the construction of something new for regional, what about the decommissioning of a number of communities at the same time? Type of waste management sites. We're moving to look at our waste management sites based on the waste type that you're taking. So are you taking municipal waste? Are you taking industrial waste? That's what you need to be designed for. So in that regional system, there's opportunities to be innovative and say, okay, well, we have a region that's seeing real economic growth, a lot of construction and demolition material coming out of there, resort areas where people buy the $500,000 cabin, tear it down and put up $1.5 million cabin and then want to dispose of that waste for free. Probably isn't the best. So can you construct an inert landfill just to take construction and demolition waste rather than having those haul costs to the regional landfill? Once you look at that regional model too, opportunities for economic development and different types of recycling start to become reality. So, there is C&D recycling or shingle recycling close to Saskatoon because of the volumes and they're working together. So can you get those starting to pop up in a Swift Current or other areas of the province as you start to come together as communities? Economic development, there is money to be made in waste. Waste sites should be run for profit and to generate that revenue. There's different business opportunities. Do you have haul companies starting up, private companies operating your landfill, waste collection and transport? Like I said, different recycling facilities that can start to pop up in communities by moving. And again, the main message is that waste management is not free. So you're not going to see this revenue or this generation economic development occurring if the waste amount remains to be free. And just a little reminder, this is from the City of Saskatoon's presentation when they were drilling their wells for their gas management system. And this paper goes back to the 70s. And when they were drilling and the waste was coming back up from their drill holes, everything was still intact. So it's not going anywhere, no matter how long we leave it there. So we have to best manage it and understand those impacts for the generations to come. Just relating to the unauthorized dumping scenario and littering, one of the things we hear a lot about is, well, you know, if we're shutting down landfills or we're going to have to start charging for waste, we're going to see a lot more dumping. And that's a scenario that we've asked the other jurisdictions if that occurred. And their feedback was really, no, it didn't occur. Those that aren't going to do the right thing aren't going to do the right thing regardless of what's put in place for them. But we do have a pilot project going on in the Prince Albert area between the City of Prince Albert and the two RMs to try and look at bringing stakeholders together to address unauthorized dumping and littering. And we had 80 unauthorized dump sites in the forest outside of Prince Albert identified. And I think we got 62 of them cleaned up last year with the stakeholders. So that project is on Facebook. It's called Keep Prince Albert and Area Beautiful. So you may hear more about that coming up in the next year as they've had one successful year of that pilot project. So a lot of the information that I pulled from today is scattered throughout different presentations on the SWANA website, which the link is there. Like I said, some really good presentations from other jurisdictions and from some of the consultants. So, you know, the message on environment is really, like I said, with that City of Saskatoon picture, that waste not going anywhere, but those impacts and the potential from those impacts remain. So we really need to start understanding if our landfill has impacted the environment around us and how we best mitigate those. So that, I'll turn it over to Che-Wei.
I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk about solid waste management strategy. It's this idea actually came from many of you in the past when we went out there to do different engagement with municipalities, and also one that was back in, I believe, 2010 when environment was doing the environmental code development. There was definitely a lot of stakeholders saying that, you know, we're looking at modernizing our regulation, but what is the province's plan when it comes to solid waste? So we started thinking about those ideas, and today I have a little bit more to share with you and kind of give you, I would say, tentative timeline of what we're thinking about. I don't think I need to go into a lot of detail in the first couple PowerPoint slides. The first one that talks about the rationales. I guess here are our rationales, and often I think it's very similar to stakeholders such as you in the urban municipality when it comes to managing solid waste. Really, right now, we're looking at from time to time, we're looking at solid waste as more compartmentalized in terms of each municipality, a landfill, there's a recycling program. Maybe it's a time to bring everything together and say that how can we manage this as a whole? And also that there are a lot of best practices out there. How do we share the information, and how do we get the right information to the right people who are managing these waste? And another one is focus on coordination, because I think when a waste management, you actually start with reduction and reduce, reuse and recycle. And after that, eventually move down to the landfilling. So how do we look at the entire waste management chain from the beginning to the end is quite important. So the area of focus, we have done some research on our own, and some of this came from feedback from you too, is that, you know, the area we think that the upcoming solid waste management strategy should focus on is how do we integrate the entire waste system. So you could be looking at recycling, you could be looking at regional waste, it could looking at private sector's role in hauling the waste, or in terms of landfill too. And I think it's from our perspective, it's also important to look at today's current recycling programs. We do have many of them, and some of our programs were the first in North America. For example, our waste electronic program. Are there rooms to expand them? Are there rooms for new programs? Well, the last one is about the government leadership part, which is looking at innovation, looking at the technology, because technology it's only going to get better over the years. And that relate to both solid waste, and could be landfilling, could be waste to energy, and also recycling too. So we see that there's definitely a government leadership to look into that, and also have more communication and education on, like I said, the best practices. Most of these work are internal, and most of these work are research to understand what other provinces are doing and what we can do better, or are any areas that lessons learned from other provinces we should be doing. And so we had a fairly comprehensive internal paper that outlined all these subjects I believe you mentioned. And also we have identified some theme, which I would say the last slide talks about some really broad themes. And also now we do have a consultation timeline. It's very tentative. Timeline can be changed, depends on the situation or if longer time needed. And in terms of consultation to date, we have some really brief discussion with stakeholders, and nothing formal and nothing confirmed. Really just approach them and to say that, okay, do you see that there's a need for a strategy? What do you think should be in it? What do you feel like a strategy should do? So it's a very preliminary conversation, and we did that in the regional, actually that's a SWANA, November 2014. And this year we went to SWRC, Saskatchewan Waste Reduction Council. They have education sessions, so we did a presentation there. Then we went back to SWANA again this last November to get a little bit more of presentation on this. So what we heard, this when we started last November till now, this is kind of what we heard from the stakeholders as we continue on with our development. The first one is that majority of people we spoke to, they feel like there is need for a strategy. And they feel like strategy is a good way to identify issues and opportunities, especially related to municipal solid waste. I think Sarah has identified some of them, and one of them is how can we build in tools for more regional collaboration. Could be internal regional landfills, could be regional waste authority, or it could be a private sector. Depends on situation and depends on your location, because sometimes private sector is available to do those solid waste management. And also there's a discussion on should we have more recycling programs, because there are more materials can be recycled now. And sometimes recycling program can actually encourage long-term reduction, because most of the all the recycling regulation obligate producers to pay the cost of recycling. The last one, which we are doing this as part of our research and development strategy, is to have financial resources. So a good feedback that we receive is that, okay, you're gonna have a strategy, you're gonna identify recommendations, but how much will this cost? What's the implication on urban municipalities? What's the implication on the residents, or even from the province perspective? So that should be considered as part of the development for the strategy. So we are doing that, and we hope that will be part of a recommendation. So here's the next step. Here are just tentative timelines. Like I said, we're following this. However, if we require more time, more times will be added. And first, we want to do an internal advisory committee, which we want to bring more than one ministry together, because solid waste is not just an environment one. There's related government relation, economy, definitely health. So we want to bring them in to help us to develop a strategy, where hopefully we can finish the draft by early 2016. It can go through an internal review, and maybe spring of this year we can bring out a draft one and start the official engagement aspect of it. We could do that either through SUMA or maybe to you directly. So there's definitely opportunity for stakeholders like you to provide feedback before we finalize anything. Like I said, everything I talked about before, we haven't finalized what a strategy will look like or recommendations. We just have some ideas, and once a finished product, a draft strategy is developed, the stakeholders definitely will have opportunity to look at and provide feedback. That's it.